What if the sky you dream of is not a place, but a memory your soul forgot? What if freedom is not something you chase, but something you left behind when you learned to survive? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast horizon where 5 birds circle above you. Each one carries a different rhythm, a different song, a different promise of liberation. One rises on thermal winds with barely a movement. Another darts through the air like a living arrow. A third glides low over water, touching the surface with its wings. The fourth perches high, watching everything with ancient eyes. And the fifth moves in patterns you cannot predict, as if it knows a secret about the wind itself. But here is what you need to understand before you choose.
Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the symbols that live in the deepest caves of human consciousness, and he discovered something that most people never grasp. Your choices are not random. They are echoes of a part of yourself that you buried so deep you forgot it was there. And by the end of this video, you will discover the one truth about your relationship with freedom that has been quietly sabotaging every decision you make. The bird you choose will reveal the cage you built for yourself. Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you see every choice you have ever made. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a realm where all human experiences, all human fears, all human longings live together like rivers flowing into the same ocean.
But here is the paradox that Jung understood and that most people miss. We do not fear being caged. We fear the responsibility of being free. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. Every person walking this earth claims they want freedom, but watch what they do when you offer it to them. They hesitate. They calculate. They ask for guarantees. Because true freedom means true uncertainty, and uncertainty means confronting the parts of ourselves we have spent our entire lives avoiding. But why this test? Why now? The answer lies in the part of your soul you have been afraid to look at. The part that knows you have been making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. The part that remembers what it felt like before you learned that wanting too much made people uncomfortable. Before you discovered that spreading your wings made others feel the weight of their own chains.
So look at these 5 birds one more time. Do not think, do not analyze. Let your instinct guide you, because your unconscious mind already knows which one is calling your name. And in the darkness of that call, there is a secret waiting to be illuminated. The first bird is the eagle. Watch it now, riding the thermals 2,000 feet above the earth. It does not flap, it does not struggle, it simply rises, carried by invisible forces that lesser creatures cannot feel. Its feathers are dark brown, almost black in certain light, with flashes of gold when the sun catches them just right. This is a bird that sees everything, that misses nothing, that lives in a realm most beings can only imagine. At first glance, the eagle represents power, dominance. But here is what most people are too afraid to admit about this choice. You did not choose the eagle because you feel powerful. You chose it because you feel the opposite. You chose it because somewhere in your childhood, you learned that the only way to be safe was to see threats coming from miles away. You learned that vulnerability was dangerous, that letting your guard down meant getting hurt. So you built yourself a tower in the sky where nothing could touch you. Jung called this the sovereign archetype, the king or queen who rules from a place of isolation. The eagle person carries a wound of betrayal. Somewhere, someone you trusted used your openness against you. Maybe it was a parent who punished you for showing emotion. Maybe it was a friend who shared your secrets. Maybe it was a lover who made you feel like your needs were too much, too demanding, too heavy for anyone to carry. So you learned to need nothing. You learned to scan every horizon for danger. You learned that freedom meant being untouchable, unreachable, alone. And now you circle above the world, watching life happen below you, telling yourself this distance is strength, when really, it is the most sophisticated cage you could have built. The bars are invisible because they are made of your own fear of falling. But the eagle carries another secret, one that Jung understood through his concept of the shadow self. The shadow is not evil, it is simply everything you decided you were not allowed to be. And your shadow, eagle person, is the part of you that longs to land, the part that is exhausted from constant vigilance, the part that wants to fold its wings and rest in the presence of another soul without wondering when the attack will. And until you understand that, you will keep choosing altitude over intimacy, perspective over presence, power over peace. Now listen closely, because this next part changes everything. The second bird is waiting, and it could not be more different from the eagle. Stay with me. The hummingbird. Watch it now, suspended in midair, wings beating so fast they become a blur. It moves forward, backward, up, down, side to side, defying every law that says movement must be linear, that progress must follow a straight line. Its feathers shimmer with iridescent greens and purples, colors that seem to shift and change depending on the angle of light. This is a bird that lives at a frequency most others cannot perceive. If you chose the hummingbird, you are someone who has learned to survive by staying in constant motion. Your freedom is not about distance or height. It is about never staying in one place long enough for anyone to pin you down, But here is the truth that lives beneath that beautiful, frantic flight. You are exhausted. You are so tired of performing, of adapting, of being whatever each situation demands. Jung called this the magician archetype, the shapeshifter who can become anything, but struggles to simply be something. Your childhood taught you that love was conditional, that acceptance required constant effort, that if you stopped entertaining, stopped pleasing, stopped making yourself useful, you would be forgotten. So you learned to hover, to never fully land, to keep all your relationships in a state of suspended animation where no one can get close enough to see how much energy this dance is costing you. The hummingbird person often had a parent who was emotionally unpredictable. One day warm, the next day cold. One moment praising, the next moment criticizing. So you learned to read the room.
And now, even when you are alone, you cannot stop moving. You cannot stop performing. Because stillness feels like death, like disappearing, like ceasing to exist. Your shadow self is the part of you that wants to be boring, the part that wants to land on a branch and just sit there, unimpressive, unremarkable, not dazzling anyone with your ability to defy gravity. The part that wants someone to love you on your worst day, when you have nothing to offer, when you are just sitting there being ordinary and human and tired. Your need for freedom is actually a need for permission to rest. And the cage you live in is made of your own belief that your worth is tied to your motion, your usefulness, your ability to make other people feel something. The next sign is even more telling of your future. Stay with me, because the third bird carries a message your soul has been waiting to hear.
The albatross, watch it now, gliding low over the ocean waves, wings outstretched wider than your arms could ever reach. It barely flaps, riding the wind currents that dance between water and sky. It can fly for hours, for days, for weeks without landing. This is a bird built for endurance, for the long journey, for crossing distances that would break lesser creatures. At first glance, the albatross represents commitment, loyalty, the ability to stay the course no matter how long the journey takes. And yes, if you chose the albatross, these are your gifts, but they are also your curse. You did not choose the albatross because you love journeys. You chose it because you cannot stop moving forward, because stopping feels like failure, like giving up, like admitting that maybe you were wrong about the destination you chose 20 years ago. Jung spoke of the warrior archetype. The albatross person carries the wound of abandonment, but in a specific way. You were not abandoned suddenly. You were abandoned slowly, through neglect, through absence, through the people who physically stayed but emotionally left. So you learned that the only way to prove your worth was through loyalty, through dedication, through your ability to endure what others could not. Maybe you had a parent who was always working, always busy, always focused on the next goal, and the only time you felt seen was when you matched their dedication, their work ethic, their refusal to rest. Or maybe you experienced loss early, and the only way you learned to process grief was to keep moving, to never look back, to treat every relationship like a marathon you have to finish, even when your body is screaming for you to stop. Now you circle the same patterns, the same relationships, the same jobs, telling yourself that persistence is virtue, when sometimes it is just fear wearing a noble mask.
You stay in situations that are slowly draining your life force because leaving feels like betrayal, like weakness, like proving that you are not strong enough to make it work. But here is what most people are too afraid to admit about this choice. Your shadow self is the part of you that wants to quit. Not because you are weak, but because you are wise enough to know that some journeys are not meant to be completed. Some destinations were chosen by a younger version of you who did not know yet that you are allowed to change your mind, that you are allowed to land, that endurance without joy is not strength, it is slow death. Your need for freedom is actually a need for permission to rest without shame. And the cage you live in is made of your own belief that stopping means failure, that changing course,
But it does not. Landing makes you human.
The owl person carries the wound of invisibility, not because you were unseen, but because you were seen incorrectly. You were misunderstood so many times by so many people that eventually you stopped trying to explain yourself. You stopped seeking recognition in the daylight world and learned to find your power in the spaces other people fear. Your childhood likely taught you that being different was dangerous. Maybe you were too sensitive in a family that valued toughness, too thoughtful in a culture that rewarded action, too deep in a world that preferred surface. So you learned to hide your true nature during waking hours and come alive only when others were not watching. You learned that your greatest insights came in solitude, that your real self could only breathe in darkness. But here is the shadow truth. You have convinced yourself that isolation is enlightenment, that distance is wisdom, that being misunderstood makes you special.
But sometimes, owl person, sometimes it just makes you lonely. Sometimes the price of being the only one awake in the darkness is that you miss the joy of being awake together in the light. Your shadow self is the part of you that wants to be understood without having to work so hard at it, that wants to have simple conversations about simple things without wondering if everyone else is missing the deeper meaning that you cannot stop seeing. Your need for freedom is actually a need to be seen in daylight without being diminished, and the cage you live in is made of your own belief that depth and connection cannot coexist, that being truly known means being rejected, that safety lives only in shadow. Now, listen closely, because this next part changes everything. The fifth bird is the one most people do not choose, and that tells you everything.
The crow. Watch it now, moving in ways that seem chaotic, unpredictable, almost mischievous. It lands on a fence post, then immediately takes off for no apparent reason. It calls out to its companions in a language that sounds harsh to human ears, but carries complex meaning. It plays, it investigates, it takes shiny objects, not because they are valuable, but because they are interesting. This is a bird that lives by its own rules, that adapts to any environment, that finds beauty in places others call wasteland. If you chose the crow, you are someone who has learned that freedom means refusing the script, that liberation comes not from rising above or enduring or hiding, but from embracing the messy, complicated, contradictory truth of who you actually are. Jung spoke of the trickster archetype, the disruptor who breaks rules not for chaos, but for transformation. The crow person carries the wound of rejection, but you wear it differently than the others.
You were told you were too much, too loud, too wild, too unpredictable, too emotional, too chaotic. So instead of making yourself smaller, you made yourself bigger. You leaned into the very qualities that made others uncomfortable, because if they were going to reject you anyway, you might as well be rejected for who you actually are. Your childhood taught you that authenticity was rebellion, that being yourself meant disappointing people, making them uncomfortable, forcing them to confront parts of life they wanted to ignore. So you became the one who asks the questions no one wants to answer, the one who laughs at funerals and cries at parties, the one who refuses to pretend that normal is working when you can see the cracks in everyone's carefully constructed facades. But here is what most people are too afraid to admit about this choice. Your shadow self is the part of you that wants to belong.
That is tired of being the outsider, the weirdo, the one who never quite fits, that wants someone to understand that your chaos is not rejection of order, but a desperate search for authentic order, for rules that actually make sense, for a way of being that does not require you to cut off parts of yourself to participate. Your need for freedom is actually a need to belong without conforming. And the cage you live in is made of your own belief that acceptance requires performance, that love means betraying your nature, that fitting in is the opposite of being yourself. You have been making yourself stranger than you are because you are afraid that your real self is not strange enough to justify how much you have sacrificed to stay true to it. But here is what Jung understood that most people never learn. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart.
Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Every bird you see circling above you is you. The eagle's need for safety, the hummingbird's need for rest, the albatross's need for permission to land, the owl's need to be seen, the crow's need to belong. These are not separate identities. They are different voices of the same soul, all calling you home to the truth you have been running from. The truth is this: you are not seeking freedom from the world. You are seeking freedom from the story you told yourself about who you had to become to survive it. You are seeking permission to be the full complexity of a human being, with contradictions and needs and fears and longings that do not fit neatly into any category, any archetype, any single choice. The real cage is the belief that you have to choose, that you can only be one bird.
That freedom means committing to a single way of flying and never wavering from it. But that is not freedom. That is just another form of prison, more sophisticated because you built it yourself and called it identity. True freedom, the kind Jung spent his life pointing toward, is the ability to be all of these birds at different moments, to soar when you need perspective, to hover when you need to adapt, to glide when you need endurance, to perch when you need wisdom, to dart and play and investigate when you need to remember that life is not just about arriving somewhere, but about the strange and beautiful chaos of being alive. The bird you chose tells me which cage you are ready to see, which story you are ready to release, which part of your younger self is calling you back to remember what you knew before the world taught you to forget.
And the beautiful, terrifying truth is this: the door has always been open. The sky has always been waiting. The only thing keeping you caged is your belief that you need permission to fly, that you need to earn your freedom, that you need to prove you are worthy of the vast and infinite space your soul has been longing for. You do not need to prove anything. You never did. You just need to remember that freedom is not a destination you fly toward. It is what you are made of. It is the essence of your being, the birthright you forgot, the truth that lives in every choice you have ever made and every choice you have yet to make. So here is my question for you. Now that you know which bird called to your soul,
Now that you can see the cage you built and the story you told yourself about why you needed it, what will you do?
Will you keep circling the same patterns, telling yourself that one day you will be ready to truly fly? Or will you do the hardest, most courageous thing a human being can do? Will you forgive yourself for building the cage in the first place? Will you thank it for keeping you safe when you needed safety? And will you walk out of it, not because you finally became strong enough, or worthy enough, or healed enough, but simply because you remembered that cages were never meant for creatures with wings? The sky is not waiting for you to be ready. The sky is just waiting. And your soul, that wild and ancient part of you that chose this human life, is done with preparation. It is done with planning. It is done with all the reasons why not. It is time. Tell me in the comments which bird chose you and what cage you are ready to release.
Because your story matters, your freedom matters, and somewhere in this world, another soul is waiting to read your words and remember that they are not alone in their longing for the sky.